Hello, everyone. Welcome to Mundo de PilarAymara, Rosalia TV, again to speak about what is happening in Scotland. And today I have the pleasure to be with an SNP MP, a Trade Committee Chair in Westminster for Nahil and Anir, the Western Isles, Kimarahashef Angus Brendan MacNeil. Es Duolingo, you know.
Clever, it's in ma. Irish, Gaelic, Berla, feather.
Okay. Thank you for spending your time and joining me today, okay? Because there's a lot of things happening in Scotland, and I'm being interviewing people from different organizations, parties, etc. So I was very curious about your vision about what is happening in the future of Scotland, okay? So my first question, of course, is what's your take on the strategy of the Scottish government of going to the UK Supreme Court and the result of that now?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's something that could have happened any time in the last 4 to 5 to 6 years, perhaps, to establish. There was a bit of argument about whether the Parliament had the powers to hold a referendum without a Section 30. And the Parliament spent its entire last term doing just nothing about that other than laying draft independence bills or draft referendum bills. There's a couple of those. Every time the members got restless, the Scottish government and the SNP leadership sent in a draft referendum bill, which, as we can see now, is a complete waste of time because nothing happened with any of those draft referendum bills in the Parliament from 2016 to 2021. And then in this Parliament from 2021, we were told we were certainly being the SNP leadership, and the leader, Nicola Sturgeon, told us no ifs, no buts. We were having a referendum on the 19th of October. And then she went to the Supreme Court to see if she could have one. Without legislating, she took herself to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided against it because the Supreme Court said that if the devolved Parliament was to pass some legislation, and although the vote would have no referendum would have much legal weight anyway, but what it does have is moral authority. The word authority was there. And it would force the Westminster government to take some actions on a reserved issue because of the authority of people speaking at the ballot box. So, you know, it was good it went there. It'd been better if it'd gone there after legislation. It's good to have the answer anyway. And the answer is, as predicted for 3 or 4 years by some of us, that you couldn't have a referendum unless you had Westminster agreeing, and Westminster is not going to agree when it looks like Westminster's going to lose and Scotland's going to win. And an election will have to be used. So now the people who are telling me for 3 to 4 years that it was a silly idea, it was a daft idea, it was an incredibly daft idea, it was something I got from the very top. Now it has to be used because there's nothing else available. Now the battle is to use which election. And there's people who are just as certain that there couldn't be, that we had to use a referendum and there would be a referendum, are now already prejudging which election we should use. And I think we shouldn't. We should have a debate about it, and we should leave that to the members to decide on the basis of good, solid argument. So, I mean, and a final point I would just maybe add in there is that even some people are talking about, you know, would Westminster recognise it? And so a matter for them at the top of the Scottish government to comment on it, something for the likes of Rishi Sunak. Well, Rishi Sunak won't be in place if we leave it to Westminster. The Tories are out. You have to address these questions to Keir Starmer. So the one thing is there's not a lot of detailed strategic thinking been happening. I'm being very critical here, but I'm being absolutely honest with you as well, as the way I see it. And, you know, where we should be having debates, we haven't had debates. Hopefully that will change and people have learned.
Yes, I've been following all the debates in Westminster, of course, and the SNP in Westminster has had very recently a change of leadership, you know? And with Stephen Flynn replacing Ian Blackford. But does this mean a change in the strategy and a push for independence of a same old? But because 2 days ago, we were watching an amendment or a debate about an amendment to change the Scotland Act that failed again.
It failed hugely. It failed by 223 votes. There's nothing we can do in Holyrood that would fail by that amount. I mean, it was going nowhere in the beginning. I mean, the idea to amend the Scotland Act and take control of the order paper. I know Stephen Flynn, the new leader, didn't speak in that debate, so perhaps says what he thought of that. I'm not sure. I haven't spoken to him about it. But you clearly, I mean, the referendum issue is dead. It's dead, dead, dead. It's as dead as the deadest parrot ever was in the Monty Python program. So it's about elections now. And I think some people are taking a bit of time in the 3.5 weeks to catch up with what really the Supreme Court has said. And, you know, there's no way of getting a referendum now, especially now. I mean, you could have legislated for one and then dared the Supreme Court to strike it down. That would have left the UK Supreme Court in an even worse situation, the UK establishment. Remember, the UK Supreme Court's a creation of the UK government. The Scottish government asked the Supreme Court, created by the UK government, to view legislation of the UK Parliament's, the Scotland Act 1998. We could have gone there after legislating and dared the Supreme Court to take on the democracy. You know, we see that Supreme Courts in various countries, most notably the United States, aren't sort of blank machines that sort of make decisions. They're living organisms with living people who will inevitably have biases. And, you know, I think, however, the Supreme Court's ruling is very useful in paragraph 74 to 81 because it says of the power of the ballot box. So the people, what the Supreme Court did was prevent the question being asked because they were afraid what the answer, the results of the answer would be. But the thing they didn't seem to think about at all was that question being asked at an election. And anyway, no court can stop an election. And nobody can stop you at a free and fair election asking the people any question. So we just have to use elections. The same ballot boxes, the same physical infrastructure as you would have at a referendum will be used at an election. And, you know, we have ourselves going that way inevitably. But yeah, I mean, I think the idea of changing the Scotland Act at Westminster was a forlorn hope of seeming to be doing something. You know, the building might be burning, but we were throwing a cup of water in the general direction of the fire, just to look active.
Angus, sometimes it looks like the SNP is divided between those who are happy and comfortable enough with evolution and those who want to push for independence. Yeah, and let me say that you are a free verse in the SNP because I've been following your analysis and your interventions, and as you say, you're very critical with some strategies, and there is a lot of frustration in the Yes movement, and some are suggesting that the SNP will not hold a plebiscite ever. What's your feeling on that? And what's the feeling inside the SNP?
The feeling inside the SNP is probably changing. You know, where there was once blind trust, obviously trusting a strategy that failed miserably or just didn't get off the ground makes people reflect. You know, people like to feel a sort of a certain circle the wagons loyalty, regardless. But I mean, people are going to have to think for themselves and think through what is likely to happen. And what do we want happening, and the consequences of things not happening. And, you know, I'm often reminded, two things from history that remind me. One's local and more personal, and one's bigger for Scotland. But the night before Bannockburn, great Scottish hero Robert the Bruce didn't want to fight. He wanted to kind of have what he held and just didn't want to risk anything. And it was Neil Campbell, the chief from Argyll, of the Clan Campbell, and Angus MacDonald of Islay, who apparently, I wasn't there, obviously, good 700 years ago, made Robert the Bruce fight the English that night, or the following day on the 23rd of June. And that changed history because, you know, imagining that a leader was infallible or that something was divinely ordained or predestined was a problem. And, you know, Robert the Bruce wasn't infallible. He was human and could make mistakes, but luckily they didn't blindly follow him. they thought Robert the Bruce needed to listen and get some counsel. And Robert the Bruce had the wisdom to listen to counsel and to listen to advice. And of course, Scotland became an entity of its own that we have today, fortunately, for the economic good of people who live here, not just for the historical niceness, but I mean for a chance of us to be like Iceland or Ireland or Norway in the future if we get independence. And the second thing is, there was a man who lived here in the island, and he was a coxswain of the lifeboat, and he took great care of the lifeboat. But he was never afraid to risk his lifeboat to save lives. He knew the purpose of the lifeboat. And sometimes I wonder if some of us think deeply enough about the purpose of the SNP. The purpose of the SNP should not be the self-perpetuation of the SNP or any political party. It should be moving Scotland forward for our communities, for our islands, for our relatives, for our families, for our cities, for our towns, to make a better Scotland. And we can see this is happening in other countries. And the big thing, you can talk about all the money you want in the world and taxes and spending, but the projections for the next 30 years is that the Irish population will rise about 20%, the Icelandic population about 32%. These are countries around us, incidentally. Norway up 10 to 15, Denmark similarly, and the small Faroe Islands, which have already risen a lot in the last number of years, are going up another 6. I'd be surprised if that figure wasn't greater for the Faroes. But the big point in the middle of all that, of rising population and economic success, is Scotland in 30 years' time is due to have 2% less people. And the islands I live in are going to be worst of all. So there's a cost to doing nothing. There's a cost to not using that lifeboat, if you like, to try and bring some saving to Scotland so that we can be like the other countries round about us. And I think that informs me as to where I'm going, and others have to think for themselves and look at themselves and choose which ways they want to go. But I know that what's driven me towards independence hasn't been the idea of Scotland being something or other. It's been the idea for people to have jobs, families, businesses, and a successful life in this geographical corner of the world.
Yes, we will back to this issue, precisely the economy and the disaster of Brexit, another question. But I want to ask you, because the First Minister of Scotland and the leader of the SNP promised a national convention in 2020. Do you think this is going to happen? And what's your opinion of working with other parties and organizations in order to...
Is that in 2020? There's so many promises made in the past. There's a promise for a referendum in 2020. I was critical of the election in 2019 because I thought, well, if you're having an election in 2019, it's because we caused an election that gave Boris a majority. And if we had that, incidentally, I voted against it, but if we had that, spending money in the election, we weren't going to have a referendum in 2020, I argued, and we didn't. So this convention's in 2023 or 2020. You mentioned 2020.
2020, yes. No, she promised in 2020, I think. The promise or the first mention of a national convention was in 2020. That's my
well, I think we should get on. I think we should get on. I mean, we're going to have a special SNP conference early in the new year, and that transpires today to be early in the new year, isn't it? The 19th of March. It's a quarter of the year gone. I wouldn't say it's early in the new year. It's just 2 days before the equinox. I think we have to work with everybody else who's looking for independence. But it depends. I mean, if this conference becomes a sort of a fait accompli for nothing but a Westminster election for 2 years' time, there's nothing much to work on for a while. I mean, we can have a break until the Tories decide to call an election. It'll be the same as we've had up till now, which is whatever it's been. So it won't be any change. Hopefully, the conference will give the membership the opportunity to choose. And I did a wee Twitter poll, unscientific as Twitter polls are, but I gave 3 options in the last 24 hours with a view to come to speak to yourself, Pilar, of the choices that people would have. An early Holyrood election in 23, the Westminster one, whenever it's called, in 24 or early 25, or the next scheduled Holyrood one in 2026. And with 66% of 2,000 people voting, the Holyrood one was the favoured one. So if that was reflective of the SNP membership and they get a chance to vote in it, then it'll be down to the MSPs and the First Minister to either create the circumstances where you get 2/3 of the Parliament voting for an election. Oppositions tend to want elections, even in crazy situations such as 2019. Oppositions wanted elections. every time the opposition parties have something to say about the SNP and how badly they're doing, as they do every week, well, let's challenge them to an election and let's us put what we want to the people and let them put what they want to the people. Alternative, of course, is the First Minister just resigning and either nobody standing or one person standing being blocked. If two people stand and one gets elected, you then use, because we've got a majority, votes of no confidence. But you have to have the intent to do something. But there is a way to do it. And, you know, SNP members and branches can be pressurising their MPs and particularly their MSPs to achieve and offer something for Scotland earlier rather than later. You know, if there's a chance for Scottish independence happening in 2023, we shouldn't be blocking it, for goodness sakes.
Obviously, your first option is an early election, Holyrood election, a plebiscite, and but I don't see many people supporting that choice, Angus.
No, I mean, I'm seeing particular silence amongst. I've got you're right that Pilar. I would like to say otherwise, but I'll say things as I see them. I mean, general membership might be supporting that. If that were members of the SNP that voted in that Twitter poll, I was just about 66%. But I think it's quite clear it's not Nicola Sturgeon's favoured option at all. She doesn't want to do that. She doesn't want to have an election at all right now. Like Robert de Bruce, she's got one opinion. There should be others around her with other opinions. And the opinion ultimately that matters is that of the membership and an open debate where we tease out. You know, Nicola, I've just saw a video recently of Nicola being sort of admitting herself that she had sort of an irrational fear of elections just prior to the 2014 referendum and that she was very nervous about it. So, you know, that might be just a natural thing that we've got to help her overcome. You know, for the good of us all, and particularly for our own good. And I think it'd be quite good to maybe take people through any concerns they might have. But yeah, you're right. My preference is that it was a preference after the Supreme Court of a number of MSPs, but then let's say a number of opinions were shared and some have become silent. So I don't know if that's still their opinion or not. It's for them to speak. I'm happy to speak for myself. I'll not put words in their mouths. If they choose to remain silent, they choose to remain silent at the moment. But I would remind SNP members that MPs and MSPs are there due to the membership. And it's up to the membership if they want Scotland to be independent earlier, sooner rather than later, or if they want Scotland to go through another 2 years of mismanagement by the Tories. The choice is theirs.
Yeah, well, 2 days ago, the president of Spain, Pedro Sánchez, because I was commenting on the similarities of the Catalan case from Galicia. I'm following both the Catalan and the Scottish cases, and the chilling effect. The chilling effect is promising and never delivering. No? And I see with a lot of deception and frustration that Scotland is doing the same as the Catalan parties, and I see there are a lot of sadness and many people are losing hope with independence, no? And it's concerning. It's really concerning from my point of view, no?
Yeah.
As a trade committee chair, because it's important that you pointed at the serious situation of Scotland, especially after the disaster of Brexit, and you say that independence is urgent for Scotland and this can be wait. But meanwhile, what suggestions do you have for boosting trade post-Brexit?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to touch on the first point you made there about Pedro Sánchez and the Spanish Catalan situation. I mean, I often look around and see there's sort of three situations in Europe of various levels of push for independence and desire amongst the population. The Faroe Islands have got an excellent relationship with Copenhagen and just take what you want whenever you want it. And the Faroese, of course, voted for independence in the 1940s, but weren't given it for various complex reasons. Then, of course, you got the Scottish situation with London, and I think Alfredo Bosch was visited one night, and I took him to the sort of the House of Commons terrace, where there was a number of Tory MPs, and they were speaking to me, and unionist MPs, and not only speaking but joking and civil and polite. And he was amazed. He said that doesn't happen for him as a Catalan politician in Madrid. And I thought, okay. So we saw in Catalonia that the Catalans aren't allowed to speak. And that the riot police are sent in, so the politicians are maybe somewhat nervous, and they've jailed some of them. We're in the more similar to the Faroese situation. We've got our paths to independence, and I know from a number of private conversations with MPs in Westminster and just the general society that if Scotland speaks at the ballot box and wants independence, it will be respected, which is to their credit, even though they're against Scottish independence. So we shouldn't bogeyman them too much as is tempting to do at times. So the matter is in our hands, and we've got three choices going forward. We've got the choice of something in 2023, an election about independence only, or we can mangle it up with the 2025 election, which will be probably in England the landslide for Keir Starmer coming in, and we'd only be 8% of that voice, and at best 5 to 6% of the Scottish independence voice in that election. Probably not getting on leaders' debates. Incidentally, a Canadian politician asked me this week who would be the main leader in that election. Would it be the one in the federal parliament or the one in the provincial parliament, as the Canadians thought? Would it be Stephen Flynn or Nicola Sturgeon who would take the lead in that election? So that's an interesting side from people who talk about international recognition. Who would be the main figure in that election, Flynn or Sturgeon? And then, of course, do you wait for the 2026 election in Holyrood, as I said before? But you're asking mainly about Brexit and trade. And the best thing, we had a hearing at the International Trade Committee this week. The best thing the UK can do, and I asked the UK government about this, we were told that the best thing they can do is to rejoin the single market and the customs union. And that would be the best thing for the UK economy. So I asked the UK government how much they cared about the UK economy. Were they going to take that advice? Of course, you just got the usual nonsense about trade deals and whatever. But, everywhere the UK trades with at the moment, they need to have paperwork. They can't sell a sandwich to another country with the same weight of paper going with it. And it's an astonishing situation to be in. There's a good book around at the moment, Ireland at 100 by Mark Henry, which shows how when Ireland disaggregated itself from the UK and got into the EU, although it was blocked as a consequence of Charles de Gaulle in the 60s blocking the UK, and Ireland being a sort of a satellite of the UK market up until it got into a bigger club, the difference it made in Scotland. Scotland's probably not in that situation as fully, but it's kind of as a satellite of the UK, and getting out of there and being like Ireland and trading more with countries than we do in the UK. In the UK, I mean, Ireland's biggest market still the UK, but it's now diversified that market to many other countries as well, and that's what we've got to do in Scotland. But the Brexit answer is to end Brexit. You don't make trade better by putting up barriers the way the UK has done. And incidentally, if Scotland becomes independent, of course, we're going to have some of these barriers with the rest of the UK, because they've got barriers with the entire world. There's nobody they can export or import from without problems. So it's their barriers. But the one thing about Scottish independence might provide is enough of a shock for them to get out of the stupidity of Brexit. And it's a very, very stupid thing to do. The UK is, and this is a final stuff, the UK is only one of 5 or 6 places in the world that's not in a regional trade bloc. The places are Timor-Leste in the Pacific north of Australia, Somalia, South Sudan, Mauritania, and Sao Tome and Principe in the Gulf of Guinea, and the UK are the only places in the world that are not in a regional trade bloc. So we're trying to join a regional trade bloc that's not in our region, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is, it's bringing back a fraction, if it works, of what's been thrown away with Brexit. I think about a 64th or something like that, bringing back.
Well, suffering the Brexit also, and we cannot get Scottish products such as haggis, where we usually
a great loss.
We used to celebrate our barn supper here in Santiago de Compostela, and no anymore without going to the black market. We had to pay excess duty on all products, and the mails take a month to arrive. It's just a disaster. In fact, it's a disaster. Well, Well,
You could
last
start
question.
making. You could start making the haggis, perhaps in Galicia. There,
In
yeah.
Galicia. Well, I'll tell my husband about that, but he said it's not the same, you know. It's
Yeah, of course.
the haggis of John Hill in Dunblane is one of the best, and we cannot order that. It's awful.
And that's an example, another example of, it's large and small, the examples of why we should be independent and decide to do what we want to do. That if they affect people in small ways and big ways, and that's why we should take charge sooner rather later of our own destiny rather than sit around. And there's another piece of nonsense I hear from some of my colleagues. We can't create an independence event due to the current cost of living crisis. It's because of the current cost of living crisis we should be doing it. My aunt in Ireland, I was asking her last week about strikes. It's not affecting Ireland the way it is. And last night I heard of a nurse in the north of Ireland who goes to work in the Republic as a carer and earns more as a carer in Donegal than she does in County Derry as a nurse, a qualified nurse. Anyway, sorry, you had a question before I tangented that.
No, it's okay. It's very interesting. Yes, I have one last question. Yes, you are a native Gaelic speaker from the beautiful island of Barra, which, by the way, I visited. Is fantastic airport, beautiful, beautiful place. I recommend everyone to visit Barra. And I'm curious because we have, because I speak Galician language as a minority language, we have rights, obviously, but it's very curious to see how people can get lost with with road signs in Gaelic or in Galician or in two different languages. It's pretty surreal. But have you noticed a boost for Gaelic speakers after Outlander or the explosion of Duolingo? Because we're doing our Duolingo in Gaelic and other languages, but Gaelic was an explosion.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the primary schools in the islands now, I think the confidence is growing amongst people because we were, when I was educated in school, it was Gaelic at home with my father. My mother was Irish, so it was English with my mother. But we did school in English, and that slowly changed in the 80s and 90s after I left school to have Gaelic medium schools. And it took a while for the sort of confidence, and probably the seeing others valuing Gaelic like Outlander and Duolingo probably had a reflection or sort of reflected back into the community. Also knowledge about how the benefits of bilingualism are or are meant to be in sort of maths and learning other languages as well has probably helped as well. But yeah, you do come across the sort of the strange political type who can't cope with bilingual road signs and is unaware that there's a particular colour for them, so they don't have to read that colour. It's either, I think it's white for them and yellow for Gaelic speakers, if you want. It's not a great difficulty, but some people manage to get lost. And yeah, sometimes in Gaelic and English, there's not much similarity between the names at all. And certainly the orthography or the spelling of the language is very different and the rules are very different, which somehow... But maybe they're trying to learn Gaelic and roundabouts. So I'm thinking of, what's her name, Deans, Effie Deans. Yeah, she got very confused, but maybe she was going round a roundabout trying to learn Gaelic and literally was driving around the bend. Who knows?
Well, Angus, obviously, every language is a treasure. That's a very
good. I remember having a discussion one time. There's a couple of people around about me, and one person said, "I hope when we go to heaven, we'll all speak in just the one language." And somebody else says, "Well, I hope when we go to heaven that we're able to speak all 3, 5, whatever thousand languages there are, and we can understand it and get the idioms and the jokes, because the more languages you got, the more opportunities for humor and making puns and saying things in different ways. And it just got 2 whole registers for having fun and jokes. Is what I found most of my life with it anyway."
Absolutely. Can I ask you, how many languages do you manage?
I speak Scottish Gaelic. I've made a bit of Irish Gaelic. I've been trying to learn Icelandic because a lot of the place names are the Hebrides, are from Old Norse. My accent, apparently, in Icelandic is accidentally good, and that I confuse Icelanders. But I've quickly run out of vocabulary, so they do catch me out. But I just wish we could. I think learning languages and understanding different places and getting insights into different communities. Faroese would be another I'd learn. It was a German guy, Andreas Wolf, I'm sure he wouldn't mind me mentioning him, who learned Gaelic and English. He learned the language of 1 billion, and he learned the language of 68,000. And I don't think the billion have ever so much as I offered him a beer, whereas the Gaelic speakers have been all delighted that he can speak Gaelic, that he's been offered a beer and a whiskey. So there you go.
Well, Angus Brendan MacNeil, SNP MP for Nahel and Trade Committee Chair in Westminster. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you very much for your time, Morantang. And
well, I've got to say, Pilar, your accent is really, really good in Gaelic.
Well,
I'm not just saying that; it's really good.
I promise I'm going to learn Gaelic. Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Tapalet. And every one of you, please share the video and reflection. We have to think about the ways to make a positive case for independence and self-determination everywhere. So, thank you.
Absolutely.